Hey everybody, welcome to our little session with craft beer professionals. My name is Joey Broms. I am going to be talking today about some claim stories and the nightmares of improper brewery insurance. Just going to give it a quick little second here. Um, make sure everyone is here and available before we really dive into it. Super excited to be here. Wanted to thank all of the sponsors as well. This is an awesome event. Super happy to be here and able to get some things going. So again, feel free if you have comments, questions, make sure to shoot it in the chat as we're going. I will try to make sure I'm answering as much as I can. And again, excited to be here and happy for all of you to join. So with that, hopefully I waited long enough of a minute. We will kind of get some things rolling. Again, my name is Joey Broms with Baer Insurance. We're going to talk about some brewery insurance today. So here's a quick little agenda of what I'll go through. I'll kind of explain who I am, a little bit about my agency. We're going to be chatting about the 3 ghost stories. So we'll have some fun little stories to chat about today. And then we'll talk about the actual insurance piece and how to make sure that you are insured correctly. So with that, we'll get into it. Again, Joey Broms here in Madison, Wisconsin. I honestly never really thought I would get into insurance, but here I am. Started out actually moving to Madison, worked at an advertising agency. Didn't really turn out to be what I wanted, and a friend of mine was working in insurance. Turned out to be a great fit. I really loved it and have dove in, and here we are. So again, really just kind of having fun now with working a lot with clients and breweries specifically. So loving the insurance world, and I try to do a lot in Madison here with our community. I run the community involvement committee for Madison Magnet, which is a local nonprofit that deals with young professionals. So again, the more that we can get out, especially as insurance agents as wholes, the better we can, again, connect with our actual community. So it wouldn't be a beer presentation if I didn't tell you about my favorite beer. And I think it honestly changes. But right now I've really been kind of drinking a lot of local brewery around here, of a Pilsner. So I'm going to say that one currently has been my go-to. So a lot of fun. Again, it's 12:30 here, so I don't know what time it is where you're at, but make sure to crack one open if you have the opportunity, and cheers to you all. So again, with Baer Insurance, we are a full service brokerage agency. So basically that means that we can handle all types of insurance for you. So I'm a part of our commercial team. We have a personal lines team that can help with your auto and home insurance. We have an employee benefits team to handle your health insurance needs, and as well as a life team. So again, full service brokerage agency here in Madison, Wisconsin. We actually started in 1928, so we are 95 this year, getting close to that 100-year celebratory year. But again, it's a great agency to be a part of. I've been at a few others, and we like to pretty much say that we are the high-end boutique alternative to a whole lot of other agencies. We really want to take care and attention of our clients and really kind of do more than just selling on price and product. There's a lot of value that we can add, and hopefully, again, this is where I'll kind of explain some more things that we really dive in deep, knowing a whole lot about our carriers and the industry as a whole. So with that, I will start getting into our ghost stories, that we'll call it today. Now, some of these stories, yes, are true. A few kind of have some twists and turns that aren't fully true, but again, just so you know, no actual names will be used in this presentation. So with that, we have our first story coming up, and let's dive right in with the wild yeast. So what we're going to talk about is first, what is wild yeast? With that, wild yeast is really any yeast that is introduced into your wort, which is outside of control of the brewer. So I know that some breweries actually do use wild yeast now to make their actual beer, and that's what they're trying to introduce into it. But at certain times, that's obviously not what you want. So why is this bad? There's a few reasons that wild yeast can cause some problems. One, it can change the look and the color of your beer. It can cause a little film to form pretty much on the top of your beer. This picture is kind of doing a little description of that just so you can kind of see. It could really change the alcohol content of your beer. Super attenuation, obviously just making it a lot higher, a lot stronger than what you're actually expecting. Or it could kind of mutate those flavors, again, just really changing the flavor profile of your beer. How can it get into your beer now? Is really, it's a number of things. Pretty much biggest key is sanitation. So if you're using any sort of like unsanitized materials, anything like that, just really making sure that you need to have your wort cooling systems all clean and sanitized. Really anything that those ingredients that you are using, when it's coming into contact with any part of your brewing plant, tables, bins, lids, you really just want to make sure that they are clean. Yeast is one of those things that really can pick up bacteria very quickly. So again, making sure that things are clean, your brewing environment, everything, hoses and tubes are clean. You don't want to make sure that they're not dried or cracked. Otherwise, again, it's just easier to be contaminated and some bad things can happen. So with that, there's a story, and that's where we're going to kind of get into. This one is actually a true story. So pretty much how it all started, our head brewer at this brewery decided to go on vacation, a very well-deserved vacation, absolutely. So then his second in command happened to not be as well versed in the brew making process. As we know, we can use yeast more than once as we're brewing our beer. Using it a few more times, maybe one more time than it should, did a little something to this beer that they were not expecting. So eventually the color and the flavor completely changed as this yeast did mutate into wild yeast as they were brewing. And I know what you're asking. You're thinking, what about your insurance? So this certain brewery did try to put in a claim, but it was actually denied because there was no coverage. So it ended up costing the brewery over $100,000, pretty much because the beer that they had to make, pretty much they had to just kind of eat away at it and they had to take it on the chin. They did try to end up selling some of their beer for a lower price to recoup some of their losses that they did under, a special sale. But obviously it was completely different than what they were actually expecting. So it's a big thing to try to note that wild yeast is a coverage that you need to make sure and be aware of. So that is our first story. So story number 2, tried to come up with clever names for all these, is careful where you keg stand. So with this, we are actually going to talk all about keg safety. So really this is a two for one story. I have 2 stories on the topics of kegs. There is a true story. I'm sure most of you have actually heard this one. It happens to deal with some pressurization or, the cleaning process with pressurized air. It's a huge safety concern and it's extremely important. And then we're going to have that, ghost story that we've been talking about that happens to deal with some temperature. More so, this second story is kind of a possibility of things that could happen. Again, dealing with the temperature of kegs, but we will kind of start with that first story. So again, this is a true story. This happens to deal with a 26-year-old who was cleaning a plastic keg with pressurized air when it actually ended up exploding. It ended up hitting him in the head and the chest, sending him into cardiac arrest, where he actually later passed away in the hospital. They did end up reaching a settlement for a $1.2 million that was reached. But again, I'm sorry to bring the mood down. This is no amount of money is ever greater than a life. And we do need to make sure that we are taking care and being responsible when we're doing those things. So glad that story is over, because obviously that's the hard part. So let's kind of chat a little bit about the background of it, and more so just the actual pressurization piece and working with a keg. So you are going to have some differences between plastic and steel, stainless steel kegs. Plastic kegs really aren't used too much anymore, pretty much due to the safety precautions. But again, there is still some key pieces to note when it comes to using those. There are a lot of, I'd say, safety concerns or safeguards that you can implement and that probably should be in place when you are working with your kegs. This is certain things with cleaning tactics, spare kegs while you're pressurizing your kegs or cleaning them. Again, God forbid that something were to happen. You do want to make sure that you have your own safeguards in place. If you have any questions or concerns on this, make sure you reach out. I'll make sure all of my information is at the end of this presentation. We have a bunch of safety and training resources that I would be happy to share with you all. There is, again, the pounds per square inch are very different for using a plastic versus a stainless steel keg. With the plastic keg that did happen to cause that fatal accident, it is said to be able to withstand about 60 pounds per square inch. Again, with them not being too much in use anymore, pretty much either due to their actual pounds per square inch that they can take, or again, pretty much just the safety. So with that, the stainless steel piece, they can go up to about 600 PSI, normally around 300 it is where we're really seeing it. And again, it's more so the safeguards that you want to make sure are in place for you. And again, it's all about your safety. This PSI information is all based on some information that I found from the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. This little graphic here I did want to highlight briefly is really just showing that there are certain labs that do burst testing. This happens to be with Giemacher LLC kegs. They pretty much just filled these with water and then pressurized them until they burst, trying to figure out that burst test limit. So for their 15.5 gallon keg, the burst point was actually at 850 PSI, where at their 5 gallon, it was a little over 1500. So again, some higher pressure points of that burst pressure using stainless steel versus plastic. So then for our actual ghost story, again, this is something that is not real. It's pretty much just something that could happen based on some research, some testing, and certain conclusions from happenings that we have seen. So I say that Goldilocks wants it just right, because again, we're going to be chatting about temperature here. So things not too hot and not too cold. So when we're actually going to flip it, I'm going to start with the cold side. When a keg gets too cold, obviously it's the same thing when we were all in college and drinking beers and you threw a beer in the freezer. If you put a beer in the freezer, it starts to expand and there's a potential the can could explode. It's pretty much the same thing what can happen with a keg. The beer, again, expands and there is a potential to having that keg explode. Pretty much this is just a simple fix. You want to make sure that your temperature gauges are at the right temperature. You want to make sure that they're working correctly and that really that you're not exposing any of your kegs to, freezing temperatures, any winter elements, or anything that could possibly cause them to freeze, as some things could happen. Now, on the flip side, for a keg that gets a little too hot, there have been some stories about breweries that are burning down and some neighbors, people in the area, hearing loud bangs, explosions, things like that. Again, no one knows if it truly was a keg exploding, but again, this is what could happen. Pretty much there's one of two things that actually happen when a keg really gets overheated. One, pretty much the beer starts to pressurize. That pressurized beer gets too hot, it starts to boil over, and it can actually shoot out of the bung of the keg and pretty much projecting the keg in any which direction, almost turning that keg into a torpedo. The second one is, again, getting too hot. The ball valve will start to get heat up and can actually eject out of the keg, pretty much like a bullet out of a gun. So again, it's more so safety with, you want to make sure that your kegs are not overheated or, again, in freezing temperature conditions. So on to our third story. We are up to too hot to handle. So this happens to deal with wart burns. Again, I want to touch on this because wart burns are very real. It happens all the time, and there is definitely a lot of proof. So we have, again, I'm going to have two stories for this one as well. So we have our first story, which happens to deal with boil over. So a woman was actually stirring her wort in 250-gallon tank. Again, nothing out of the ordinary here. The wort started to boil over. It actually ended up spilling all over her body, basically shoulder to ankle. It was over 33% of her body was burned. She went directly into surgery, and where she had skin graft surgery. Her recovery being in the hospital was over a month. So again, there's a lot that can happen, and definitely a serious toll that she has taken. The second story that we are going to chat about is the draining of the mash tun. So again, here's another story that a brewer is truly just going to drain his mash tun. He ended up opening the bottom drain, and the pressure from the water on top of the grain actually forced his manway open, pretty much spilling malt over 175-degree water all over him. It ended up kind of that same thing spilling down his right side of his body, actually going into his boot. So he did have pants on. Unfortunately, his pant leg was tucked into his boot. So this actually kind of turned into a cup as that water, boiling hot water, is spilling into him, really just sitting in his boot for a place to sit, soak, and continue to burn his skin. With the wart, and obviously his pant leg, again, still that tucked in boot, we'll kind of chat on that in a second. The boot actually started to suction cup to his actual foot. So he's ripping off his boot, he's trying to drop his pants, he's getting hosed off. He ends up kind of start wiping some, what he called just white stuff all over him, trying to brush that off. Obviously, that white stuff is his skin. He again went into immediate surgery. Doctors ended up grafting over 20 inches of pigskin for his shin and his foot. He was kind of in that same boat as the woman before. He missed over 5 weeks of work. So big thing to note here is pretty much using protection. It's all about safety, 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 safety. You wouldn't ever think of brewing as, a dangerous industry, but without proper knowledge, without the correct controls in place, safety precautions, people can and have been seriously injured. So you definitely want to make sure that when you are handling hot liquids and ingredients that you do use the correct protection. So again, quickly touching on just wearing long pants, something that's going to cover your skin. It's really just giving you that extra layer of protection. Wearing boots or just some sort of proper footwear. If you do happen to wear boots and pants, like our story, you definitely want to make sure that your pants are over your boots. Do not tuck your boots, or do not tuck your pants into your boots, excuse me. And then finally, pretty much wear goggles and gloves. Handling liquids tend to have a splash, spilling, things can happen. You definitely want to make sure that you are wearing, again, all the safety protection that you can. So finally, as we're kind of nearing the end, I want to touch on how insurance kind of comes into play with these. So the stories that I really wanted to touch on, these try to encapsulate different aspects of your overall insurance program. That first story with Wild Yeast actually has to deal with kind of the process of all of you making and brewing your beer. So the production of it, again, in this instance, it's not only that we work with carriers who specifically have coverage to combat wild yeast and its mishaps if it's not something that you are trying to utilize. But again, I'm touching on business income as well, as that also had a pretty valuable play, for making sure that those limits are correct, as there was a loss of income. The second group of stories, this one is a little bit of a mixed bag. Obviously, an employee being injured, you want to make sure that your workers' compensation insurance is up to date and in the correct limits. With the fact of like the actual kegs, again, this could be a little bit more on your premise liability, as it's pretty much a piece of your overall general liability and your contents coverage. So, that equipment that you own, that's kind of where, again, if something happens to a keg, that you could kind of make a claim as it is that equipment that you have that you are utilizing. That final group of stories, the burns, again, this is strictly workers' compensation coverage. You really want to make sure that your limits are adequate. I highly, highly recommend umbrellas for your insurance program. Again, just an added layer of protection. Really, work comp policies, they can depend on your experience modification, sometimes called mods, which is really just like a rating of how many claims you put in. Based on your score, you can get credits and return of premium on some of your workers' compensation policies if you're working with a carrier that offers dividends, or obviously if you're putting in more claims, you're going to end up paying more for your insurance. There's so much information on workers' compensation that we could probably do a whole separate presentation on that. But again, main takeaway, you want to make sure that you do have the correct coverage in place. So how can you avoid these at your brewery? Again, pretty basic things. You want to make sure that you're working with a trusted insurance agent. Have somebody who knows the industry, who knows the coverages kind of inside and out. And pretty much you want to make sure to review your insurance program. It doesn't always have to be yearly, but make sure that things are up to date and that your program, again, is at specific and adequate limits for you and your brewery. And with that actually concludes my presentation. So if there are any questions, please feel free to shoot a message. I'd be happy to answer anything that you have, or otherwise, here's my contact information. If you feel free, again, reach out. I'm happy to help and be a resource to all of you in your breweries. And then hopefully I will see you guys all in Milwaukee here, and we can cheers to a beer. Thank you so much for your time. I'll kind of leave it open for a second as if any questions come in. But again, thank you all so much. Feel free to contact me if you need. Awesome. Not seeing anything come in. Thank you all so much. Greatly appreciate it. Again, leaving my contact information up there. Hope to be able to reach out, or if you need to reach out, feel free to. Otherwise, hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you all so much. Take care.